In this tutorial, we'll be going over basic page construction and management in your WordPress website. So your first step is just go over to the Pages area, which is found on the left-hand side column. And so you can just click on Pages, or you can click on the drop-down that says All Pages. And this will bring you to the Page Management section. In the Page Management section, you'll see a list of all of your existing pages on your website. And so if you want to modify an existing page, you can click on any of those, and it will show you a visual representation of what's on that page and allow you to edit the content. But what we're going to go over today is just kind of creating a new page from scratch. So at the top of the page, you'll see that there's an Add New button. You can click on this Add New button, which will load another page, a blank template for you. So when you start with the blank template, the first thing that you need to do is enter your title for the page. You can just give it some kind of basic title, like Contact or About, or whatever your page subject is going to be. Once you fill in that page title, the URL for that page will automatically be created. So you'll see here that it created this page as /contact. The next step is to go into the Fusion Page Builder. Now the Fusion Page Builder is a visual page builder and allows you to have much easier control over your content. And so the first step when using that Fusion Page Builder is to click on this blue button here. And you'll kind of see below that the page changed, and we now have a little visual representation of the content. And the first thing that we need to do is add a container. When you're doing a page from scratch, it's basically the first step, and the next step would be to choose your columns, which is the structure that your content is going to be in. So if we click on this container button, we'll get a pop-up, and it will give us lots of different options. So basically the container is exactly what it sounds like. It just contains your content, and it contains your columns in a wrapper. And so you can kind of see there's a blank container here with nothing in it, which is the most basic start that you could do for page content. Otherwise, it has some recommendations on how you could lay out your columns. So you'll have lots of different options here. For example, we can just have a 1-by-1 column, which is just content stretching across the entire page. We can have 2 1/2 columns, so that if you wanted text on the left-hand side and a picture on the right-hand side, you could have that structure, and then it just breaks it down from there. For example, we have a 1/4 column on the left and then a 3/4 column on the right, and that would allow you to create like a little sidebar menu or put some kind of basic information in the 1/4 column. So there's lots of different choices on how to lay out your content. And so what I'll just choose right now is just the 2 1/2 columns, because that's a very basic structure that's used commonly. And if we click on this 2 1/2 columns, you'll now see that we're back into the visual representation of the page, but we now have our new elements that we selected. So the first element that you're going to see is the actual container itself, which is this blue bar, and it just kind of surrounds the 2 different 1/2 columns that we decided to select. Now, within a container, you can always name it on this left-hand side. You can see if I highlight this text that you can change the name of this container, and that's just for your organization. You don't have to name the container. Then over on the right-hand side, you're going to see the different container options. The first thing that shows is the container settings, which is a little pencil icon, and you'll kind of see that show up quite frequently across your page management especially, and that's actually included on the columns also, so you'll see that same pencil icon right down here, and that allows you to go into the advanced options for the containers and the columns, and I'll show you that in just a minute here. Next to that, we have to clone this container. That basically is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to copy this container and all the elements within it. So basically, if you already had text and you had some picture on the right-hand column, then you could clone this container and it would create an exact duplicate right below it. Next to that, we have the save container. This actually allows you to save the container and use it for later. So if it's some text and images, or maybe it's a line of logos of your sponsors or something like that, then you can save this container and you can actually load it into every page on your site if you want to. It just is a much easier way of duplicating content across different pages. And so if we click on the Save Container button, you can actually enter a name here and then save your container for later. And then finally, next to the Save Container, we have Delete Container, which is obviously just going to get rid of that entire section. And that does include the columns that are within that container also. So just be careful that you don't delete any of your content by clicking on that delete container button. So kind of going backwards a little bit and going into the container settings. If we click on container settings, it'll give you much more advanced options for this container. Some of the first things that you're going to see on the front page is set columns to equal height. And this will just make the columns that are within the container all the same height. So if you had some, for example, if you had two 1/3 columns and they all had some text inside of them, for example, that would make it so that the columns will all be the same height regardless of if it's the same amount of words inside of each column. Under that we have the container visibility. So this is going to show on different screens, and so a small screen is like your mobile screen, a medium screen is like a tablet, and a large screen is your desktop screens. And so if you don't want it to show up on certain screen sizes, then you can unclick these buttons and now it won't show up on a tablet, for example, or on a mobile device. And this is just useful because sometimes videos or picture galleries, they might not load in a quick amount of time on a mobile device, and so you might want to hide those from a mobile device. If we go up to the tabs at the top here, there's some other options too that I want to go over. If we click on background, that's going to allow us to put some styling onto the background of this container. So you can always choose a background color. If you select color here, it'll give you the color wheel, or you can put in your hex color inside that box to the right. It also allows you to use a background image, and so if you want an image behind all the content that you're putting inside this container, you could click on upload image, and that'll allow you to select an image from your computer. There's also some video options, so you can upload an MP4 file with this upload button here, or a WebM file, and then there's also YouTube and Vimeo URLs, and so you can actually put in a URL from YouTube and it will load that video in the background behind your content. Going back up to the top, just going to the design tab, we also have border size, so if you want a border around that container you can set it here. And then we also have margin and padding. So margin is the spacing above and below a section, so you can just space out your different sections if you want and create more white space in between them by increasing your margin here. And then the padding kind of works within the container, so if you want something to come away from the top of the container or away from the left side of the container, it would push your content farther into the middle or farther from the top, whatever you decide to assign within these boxes. After you've made all of your changes within the container options, you always have to make sure to save those options. If you hit cancel, you're going to lose everything and you'll have to go back and redo those settings. So I'm just going to click save here. So within this container, now we have these two columns. So within the columns, you'll see this little plus sign, which is how to add an element to a column. And an element is your images, your text, your videos, anything that you want to put inside that container, or inside that column, I should say. And I have a couple other videos out there where I go into the specifics about the different elements. So just see those videos if you'd like to see some of those element options. Besides the element option, like I talked about before, the same controls are on the columns themselves. And so if you actually open up this column option with that little pencil icon, you're going to see very similar options to what the container has that I was just talking about. So some of the options that are unique to the column though are the column spacing. So this will control the space in between your columns. And so if you want to increase that space, you can give it a percentage of the screen size. You can also center your content if you want, which will center the content vertically so that you'll have the same space at the top than as the bottom within your column. You can put a hover type on it so that if you hover over a column, does the content zoom in, does it zoom out, does it lift up the content? You can ignore the equal height setting that's on the container itself, like we talked about earlier, and then you'll see the kind of a few of the same options like the column visibility, and then if you go to design, we have the same background stuff. There is one extra tab at the top of columns, which is the animation type, and if you want it to like bounce into the screen or fade in as the person kind of scrolls over that area, you can put a few different basic animations on these columns also. And again, always make sure to save after you've selected those options. You can always add more containers and more columns if you hover over to the bottom area. So if I wanted, if I had put in some text in this column, and I had put in an image in this column, and then I kind of want to start my next section, then I can do so by clicking on that container button. So if I click on the container button, it'll give you that same pop-up, and then you can select the next section that you want to make. So maybe underneath this, I want to have some 1/3 columns, and so if I click on that, you'll see this new container pop in, and then all the 1/3 columns there. You can change the order of any of these columns by simply dragging and dropping. So if you want to change up some of this content, you can drag and reorder it. And you can even drag content into different containers. And so if you had this section down here, but you kind of wanted to combine these two areas, for example, you could just drag up these 1/3 columns and start putting them into that upper container. And then that way they could have like the same background color or the same background image or the same options within that container. Or even if you just want less spacing, that would create less spacing, because every time you create a new container, there's a little bit of a gap that's created to section off those areas. Once you're done with your container options, your column options, and putting your elements in, you just need to make sure that you save your page. And so I'll kind of show you some of the publish options and page attributes on the right hand side here. So if you go up to the publish area, you'll see save draft. So save draft is going to allow you to come back and manage the page later. And so this is if you don't want to publish the page online, you don't want the public to see it. You can save it as a draft, and that way you can kind of come back and finish your page later. There's a preview button also, so if you want to preview the changes that were made on your page that you just created, you can preview them here. It'll also give you the status of your page. So right now it is a draft page because we haven't published it. Once it's published online, it will say status published instead. We also have visibility options. Right now it's set to public, but there's a couple other options. Private is for anybody that's logged into the site, so you would have to have an account to see that page. And there's also password protected, where you can assign a password that people have to input before they can see the content on the page. There's also a publish date, so if you wanted to publish this at a later time, you could actually select a date with this calendar tool, and then when you hit the publish button, it will publish on that date set. There's also move to trash right here, which will delete the page, and then the publish button itself, which will publish the page online. Once the page is already online and you make changes to it, that publish button will actually change to an update button, which is essentially your save button. So just always make sure that you click on that publish or update button after you're finished with your changes. And that's about it for the basic page management. Again, see my other videos if you want a rundown on the different elements that can go inside of these columns, and I'll be going over a few of the major ones.